you enter that seminar ID into the system, and it's I swear it's really easy. I did it during the last one. And certainly we can share this information with you all afterward if you want to have that number available. I'm also going to talk, before we get into today's presentations and hear from today's presenters, I just want to talk about a few upcoming events that we have going on. So next week, actually, we have this Advancements in Implementation Science, this 2-day virtual workshop and in-person networking event. If you have not already registered, there's a link there where you can register to attend the event. And the next bullet is actually a presentation that I will be giving with John Helm at SDSU. So basically, the idea behind that presentation is that there are some common data analytic issues that come up in implementation science, some very common challenges when it comes to data analysis. And we wanted to offer some tutorials on how to go about those analyses. So the first is going to be a little bit of a tutorial on multi-level mediation for implementation science. So that's going to be November 9th. And again, if you'd want to register for that, there's a little link that you can access to do so. Yeah, thank you, Patty. That's a great question. She asked that you put a link to the slides in the chat or a link to the events in the chat. We can definitely do that. Thank you for that. Good idea. I'll also just briefly introduce some of the lovely team members here. So we have our center leads. Of course, we have Dr. Lauren Brookman-Frizzy, our center director. She's also a lead at the admin core. We have Dr. Greg Ahrens, our center director and methods core lead. I'm not sure if Sean is attending today's meeting. Sean Burke is a methods core co-lead at University of Central Florida. We have Nicole Stadnick, who's an admin core co-lead again for the InStep Center, and I'm Marissa Sklar. I'm a co-lead of the Methods Core. Now, I mentioned that the InStep Center offers pilot funding, and today we are hearing from 3 individuals who were awarded with some funding to do some pilot projects. And in fact, we just closed our most recent RFA for next year's funding, but each of these pilots are required to incorporate this model in their proposals. The work really intends to bridge what we call team effectiveness research with implementation science. We recognize that implementation often happens in the context of teams. We think about the delivery of services to children and adolescents. It often happens amongst team members. And the idea is that team functioning and team effectiveness can actually impact the delivery of these services. So we have this model here that we use to guide a lot of our work, to guide a lot of our research. And again, all of the projects that you'll hear from today were required to incorporate this model in their proposals in order to be successful with funding. So now let me introduce you to our presenters who will be presenting today. We have 3 fabulous presenters. You see here on the screen first is Melina Melgarejo. So Melina is an assistant professor at San Diego State University's Departments of Special Education and Dual Language and English Learner Education. So Melina's research utilizes a community partnered approach and focuses on exploring implementation of services for students with disabilities. And after we hear from Melina, we will hear from Ali Jobin. So Ali is an assistant professor of psychology at California State University of San Marcos. Ali has over 20 years experience as a clinician, a trainer in evidence-based practices, and she's a clinical lead and supervisor in multiple autism service settings. She has a ton of clinical experience that informs her research, And she tends to focus on treatment for children with autism and the effective delivery of evidence-based practices in community settings. And then we will hear from Joel Crumet. So Joel is a postdoctoral research associate at Kasrick within the Department of Psychiatry. Joel holds a PhD from the University of Washington School of Social Work. He has direct experience, excuse me. Joel has direct experience as a child welfare social worker supporting youth and families involved in the foster care system, and his research targets child welfare services and aims to contribute to policy and practice that strengthen the well-being of youth and families. So thank you so much. I believe we will actually start with Melina. Some some little pieces of information here if you want to keep up with the InStep Center. If you want to access our website, you could, or the DISC website, there are some links there to do so. We have a YouTube channel with lots of resources available, and X, formerly known as Twitter, we put out a lot of our resources there as well. So again, thank you so much. Very excited to hear from our lovely presenters, and Melina, we'll start with you.
Okay, sounds great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, how does that look? Good. All right. So thank you so much for having me today. As Marissa said, my name is Melina Melgarejo, and I'm faculty at San Diego State University. And today I'm going to be talking about my project titled Preparing Educators to Support Dual Language Learners with Autism, a Teaming Intervention. So to provide some background and put this project into context, in California, there's approximately 1.13 million students who are classified as dual language learners, and 12% of dual language learners are that are identified as having a disability are dually identified as having autism or having a classification of autism. And so we know that dual language learners with disabilities should be taught by teachers who are competent in both critical multilingual and special education pedagogies. However, given current credentialing programs and processes, what often is the case is that teachers are either trained to teach dual language learners in a general education setting or trained to teach students with disabilities in a special education setting. And so this can pose several problems. And so while there's been recent efforts to identify best practices for dual language learners with disabilities, specifically here in California, there's gaps between that identification of evidence-based practices and the actual implementation of them. So specifically within the school system, there are unique factors that might impede EBP implementation. Specifically within special education, there is a distributed leadership structure, and there's a lot of complex organizational structures between the schools and the districts and the overseeing organizations called SELPAs. Additionally, school-based services may include a myriad of different personnel, including special education teachers, general education teachers, SLPs, OTs, behavior analysts, psychologists, and paraeducators. And then on top of that, dual language learners in California are also required to receive comprehensive English language development instruction. And so that might include some designated time to receive that instruction with an ELD specialist or with an SLP. And so you'll see that students that are dually identified as a dual language learner and a student with a disability must receive appropriate instruction across these two fields. And so that requires a lot of teamwork across a multitude of school personnel. And on top of that, these team members might have varied teaching philosophies or differences in their professional training and exposure to evidence-based practices. And so given this complex structure, it's really important for us to understand the team mechanisms that are at play and that are associated with effective EBP implementation. So Project ECHO, which stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes, is an evidence and team-based model that's aimed at building a community of practice for complex medical conditions and increasing system capacity to implement and disseminate evidence-based practices. Specifically, Project ECHO connects community providers via video conferencing to an expert team for training in best practice and case-based learning. The ECHO model, as mentioned here, has been adapted for many conditions, including autism, where they created virtual learning networks of medical providers to increase confidence in providing autism services. There's many benefits to the ECHO model. A recent review found that ECHO improves support and knowledge networks, which are key areas of need for educators. Also, participating in ECHO reduces feelings of isolation for providers and leads to perceived support from their PD providers, and also increases access to advice on challenging cases. Additionally, there is preliminary evidence that participation in an ECHO can improve provider attitudes toward EBP. So this project specifically examines whether participating in a team-based ECHO intervention will improve the use of evidence-based practices in schools to support dual language learners with autism and increase provider knowledge of EBP. So this model, the ECHO model, builds this network of expertise, so it has high potential for sustainment and continued use even after the formal project and training is over. Additionally, by leveraging this team effectiveness research, we can analyze the relationship between the team inputs, the team mechanisms, and outcomes so that we can identify specific targets that hinder or facilitate EBP implementation. So using the team effectiveness for implementation model as a guide, this project specifically aims to form a hub team of experts who will collaboratively develop the ECHO, as I'm calling it, the ECHO DLL program curriculum, provide the program, the ECHO program, to school-based teams, and to evaluate relationships between team inputs, team mechanisms, and implementation outcomes, ultimately to inform a future randomized trial of this intervention. So again, using that team effectiveness for implementation science model, that model, as Marissa mentioned, posits a relationship between team inputs, team mechanisms, and outcomes. And so just briefly, I'll go over this just quickly and briefly. For this project, the team inputs that we're looking at, so these are antecedent factors like individual differences of team members or team characteristics. For this project, we're focusing on looking at individuals' knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes towards decision making. And we'll also take a look at team resources and team structure. For team mechanisms, team mechanisms consist of emergent states, which are dynamic properties of a team, and team processes. And so for this project, we will be looking at coordination, communication, and conflict management as the team processes. And for the emergent states, since this intervention will bring together personnel from different disciplines, we will be looking at psychological safety and shared mental models. So our participants will consist of school teams, and this will be 3 school teams from schools or districts. And these school teams will consist of a captain member who is our community partner, and I'll talk a little bit about captain on the next slide. And this captain member will assist in recruiting other team members, which may include general education or special education teachers, an English language development specialist, a school administrator, a parent, or a program specialist, for example. And then we will also have an expert hub team. And this hub team will include captain leaders and other partners we have that have extensive experience supporting dual language learners with autism. And so some members may include a BCBA, a school psychologist, again, a special education or a general education teacher, an ELD specialist, or a school administrator. So taking a step back, as I mentioned, Captain is our community partner and will be helping us both with recruitment and being a part of our school and our hub teams. Captain is a multi-agency network that is developed to support the understanding and the use of evidence-based practices for individuals with autism across the state of California. And the vision of Captain is to develop and maintain a training and technical assistance network, inclusive of various agencies in California that will work at the local level to improve services for individuals with autism. Captain is guided by a multi-agency leadership team of 40 individuals who work with these various stakeholder groups within California. Captain has over 400 representatives from these various agencies that support individuals with autism. And so these include regional centers, special education local plan areas or SELPAs, family support agencies, and higher education preparation programs. So in partnership with Captain, we have already began forming relationships with experts and providers in the field of dual language learners with disabilities. For example, Captain and Imperial County SELPA have partnered to develop an infographic that highlights how evidence-based practices for autism are aligned with best practices for supporting dual language learners with disabilities. Additionally, during the Captain Annual Member Summit, we organized a workshop for members that addressed gaps in practices and resources for dual language learners with disabilities. And the workshop included reviewing instructional strategies, using IEP goals to inform practices, and understanding parental experiences. Additionally, there has been an ECHO focused on providing professional development on EBPs for autism to providers that was conducted over the pandemic. So Captain partnered with the Autism Center for Excellence at the Mind Institute, as well as the SED Center at UC Davis, to establish the Autism Tele-ECHO for educators. Sorry. And that ECHO was aimed at equipping school providers with tools, strategies, and resources to use distance coaching to assist families during home-based instruction. And after this ECHO was over, participants reported high ratings of usefulness and relevance of the lessons. Additionally, participants reported an increase in their knowledge of EBPs, and they reported that they loved the parent-teacher collaboration that was established. So in terms of what's next for this project, we are in the middle of recruiting for our hub team, so that hub team of experts. And once we have finished recruiting for the hub team, they will participate in what is called ECHO immersion training. And the immersion training consists of 16 hours of training that includes didactic information, interactive activities, and discussion. And throughout this, they learn how to develop an ECHO, how to use case presentations and technology during the course of the program. Additionally, the hub team will participate in a mock ECHO session, and they'll get guidance on how to plan their own curriculum for their own ECHO. So once the hub team has completed the immersion training, then the actual ECHO with our school teams will begin. And that will be 6 90-minute virtual sessions that will be led by the hub team. And so these sessions will include a case presentation, discussion, recommendations, and didactic presentation. And the curriculum that will be used in these sessions, as I mentioned, will be developed by the Hub team, but some topics that we anticipate will be included will be the identification or misidentification of dual language learners with disabilities due to misconceptions of language acquisition and disability, comprehensive English language development instruction, linguistically and culturally sensitive assessments, and developing IEPs for dual language learners with autism. And the school teams will be working toward a collective goal for supporting dual language learners with autism, most likely, or for example, IEP preparation. And lastly, just taking a quick look at measures. I already mentioned what we were looking at in terms of inputs, mechanisms, outcomes, but just to give you an idea of the type of data that we will be collecting. For team inputs, prior to intervention, our participants will complete a survey inquiring about their knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes. For team mechanisms, we will be using the intragroup conflict scale. We'll use an instrument that measures coordination, communication, and cooperation. We'll use a paired comparison measure that asks about shared mental models or measures shared mental models, and the Edmondson psychological scale. And then for implementation outcomes, we'll be using a 3-part instrument that measures acceptability, appropriateness, and feasibility of the intervention. And then for educator outcomes, we will measure their knowledge of EBPs with a pre-post assessment. And that is all I have. I'm not sure if we're doing questions right now or at the end, or if there is even time for questions.
There is time for questions. Thank you, Melina. That's a lovely presentation. Absolutely. If anybody has any questions for Melina, certainly we are welcome to take them now.
So I'll just jump in. Thank you, Melina. Great presentation. How has it been engaging with the different participants in your project? I'm just wondering like how that goes, if you have experienced challenges and how you've addressed those in the process.
Yeah, what's great about that, Greg, is that because we have our community partner organization captain that is all over California in the schools on the ground, they will be essential for us in recruiting our school teams, and they have connections with the teachers and other personnel at the schools. So our community partner will be essential in that piece.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat.
Yeah, I agree with Jessica. It's an exciting project. Yeah. It's a rather large project, and you actually have quite a bit of measurement that you propose collecting. I'm so impressed by the fingers crossed. Yes, we'll see how it goes. But it certainly is exciting and has tremendous potential.
Yes, absolutely excited to get it off the ground. It is already starting to get off the ground, but to get the actual echo sessions going and give an update when that happens.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question, Marissa, before we move on?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you've started, Melina. Are there, we know that you have your plans, you have your plan measurement. Are there any challenges that you're anticipating just given what you've started so far as either the measurement and data collection or getting the echo off the ground?
That's a great
Like,
question.
what's keeping you up at night? Or maybe you're sleeping well now.
Yeah, I think one of the things is the curriculum, the development of the curriculum, right? And thinking that there's only 6 sessions. So how do we pick the most important topics for our school teams? And part of that is also ensuring that we are including that parent perspective, especially when we're talking about something like IEP preparation, right? So I think it's going to be essential also that we have parent participation both on the hub teams and on our school teams so that that voice is there. So I think on the side of getting the echo off the ground, the development of the curriculum, right? And making sure that we pick the most essential information to select. In terms of measurement or data analysis, one of the things with data analysis that we've talked about is that we have a small sample. So it would be really great to be able to do some more complex analysis in terms of like multi-level, right? We're looking at school teams that are within districts, but we'll have to be a little creative with how we take a look at that data.
And that's what the R01 is for, right? It looks like Dominique has a question about parent input.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. I'm good. Good, thank you.
Good. I apologize. I'm off camera. My laptop crashed and then my phone's almost out of battery, but I didn't want to miss these presentations. So anyway, I may have missed it because of my tech issues, but do you have parent or caregiver input as part of a mechanism of the process?
So we will have a parent on the hub team, which is that expert hub team that will be developing the curriculum. So absolutely that will be a part of the process of creating the curriculum.
Okay.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, because it's really great to have someone who's got the lived experience to help guide it to make sure the curriculum makes sense to meet the needs. And so that sounds like that role is there. And then sometimes what we've done in the past is we have family advisory councils.
Okay.
So I didn't know if that was something that was also under consideration, but that's a whole body of work. So
yeah,
you don't need to do it.
No, that's great. And I'm going to definitely note that down, not for this pilot project, but absolutely for a future project, we would absolutely have something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Related to Dominique's question, I was curious if there were any concerns about parents feeling comfortable to share their opinion. If I see you are collecting psychological safety, that's one of your measures, the Edmondson measure, but ensuring that all of those perspectives are heard, of course, there must be a context wherein people feel free to share. So I was wondering if you had any ideas about that or any concerns, any plans to try to tackle that.
Yeah, so I think because there will be one parent on the hub team, and then for each school team, the 3 school teams will have one parent. So I think selection will be important, selection of the parent. I know for our hub team, we're thinking of parents that already are involved in like parent support groups, right? That are in a position where they can help other families and other parents. So that's the first thing that I'm thinking of, is that we'll want to ensure that it's parents that are comfortable sharing and that can also go out and help other parents and families.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Are there any additional questions for Melina? I'm not seeing any. It's a really exciting project. I also look forward to hearing the next update when you're further along in the process. And for now, we can pass it on to Allie to tell us a bit about her project.
Excellent. Hey, everyone. Let me just shift gears and share my screen, but I'll do the sound check. I'm okay on audio. I tried to change my own speaker and then it wouldn't let me change back. So I just had to double check.
Yeah, you sound great, Ellie.
Okay. I hope people can see my screen. Thumbs up, good. Awesome. All right. Well, I am really happy to follow Melina, and it was wonderful to hear about her project. I will be talking about our work, team effectiveness factors in the implementation of autism evidence-based practices. And what's wonderful is to see so many familiar faces who've contributed to either work leading up to this or who are partners in this work. So what I'll walk us through is just some background and rationale, talk you through the current project and our project aims. Kind of preceding that, some of the methodology, I'll be talking about a parent study that that we are drawing these data from for secondary analyses, and I'll share our methodology, and then give an update on our early progress and plan for next steps, and then chat with questions. So autism is a significant public health concern, as Melina shared, and recent estimates are 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism. And research tells us how important access to effective intervention is for promoting positive long-term outcomes, where services are delivered for this group in many different service contexts, including educational contexts and specialized mental health services. And I know I'm speaking to an audience for which this is familiar, but you know, while evidence-based practices for autism have strong research support, and these interventions exist, they're not routinely used in usual care. And you know, this is that research to practice gap we all know so well. And it's really important that we do research on strategies for improving EBP implementation in community settings to promote that delivery of practices that were developed through these processes in feasible and sustainable ways in real, you know, real world, real life. And leaders are really important to implementation efforts, and most public systems supporting youth with autism, what we know is that they include multi-level distributed networks of leaders. And there's not a lot of research in this context on effective leadership teams. So in this context, I'm defining a leadership team as 2 or more leaders, maybe administrative or clinical leaders, working together to accomplish a goal. I will be talking about the goal of implementation of evidence-based practices. So this would look like coordinating and supporting training of providers in a specific practice and in the delivery of that practice. And we really do need to understand better how team level leadership factors are involved in EBP implementation for autism so that we can ideally improve our training and delivery. So team effectiveness research specifies these team level factors as key to our outcomes. And this work really is grounded in the need to better understand these factors and how they're involved in EBP leadership teams for autism services. And I'll walk you through our exploratory study that aims to address this gap using secondary coding and analysis of team characteristics in these contexts and in-group processes during a team-based EBP implementation strategy tested across 2 service systems, so schools and publicly funded mental health services supporting youth with autism and co-occurring mental health conditions. So I'm going to shift gears and present the parent study. So some important background about the study from which our analyses will be drawn. So this project leverages community partnerships, of course, the InStep Center and the TEAMS implementation trials. These are 2 statewide coordinated NIMH-funded implementation trials in autism services. These trials are led by wonderful investigators, many on this call. So Drs. Lauren Berkman-Frazee, Avin Stamer, and Anna Lau. And these implementation strategies targeted 2 different factors. So one targeting provider engagement and one targeting leadership support based on information from prior studies in terms of areas of need, with a focus on improving provider training and 2 evidence-based practices. And every time I explain this study, I have this visceral reaction to how complex this project really was. So 2 evidence-based practices for autism developed through community partnered approaches, called AIM High and CPRT. And the study was conducted in education and mental health settings. So the parent studies were focused on understanding how to improve provider fidelity and engagement and training, or really the adherent effective use of the practices that the providers were being trained in. Of course, also looking at our ultimate goal, which is to improve child outcomes. And the trials evaluated the effectiveness of these 2 strategies, targeting organizational leaders' support and engagement of the implementation process, and then another set of conditions targeting provider attitudes and motivation related to training. So in these respective trials, schools and mental health agencies were randomized to 1 of 4 conditions. I am focusing on the condition that engaged what's called the Teams Leadership Institute, or TLI. So that's why you see it circled here. But all providers enrolled in the trial received training in either EBP, so either intervention, AIM High or CPRT, and the conditions varied on whether they receive what we call gold standard training, the training that's already been demonstrated to be effective, or one of 3 combinations of the provider enhanced training, the leader enhanced training, or the combination of those 2. So this project focuses on a subsample of these trials, specifically the participants that were in the Teams leadership condition. So a little bit about TLI. So this intervention is a data-informed leadership intervention aimed to improve implementation climate in mental health programs or school districts and schools through implementation leadership training. Really focused on helping leaders to engage in implementation-related behaviors that encourage the provider engagement in training, success in training, and use of the specific interventions that were being tested. TLI draws from Dr. Greg Aaron's Leadership and Organizational Change Intervention, or LOCI, or that strategy targeting also similarly the development of leaders with the goal of optimizing intervention implementation. So one key adaptation that really is important to this project is that in the TEAMS trials, programs that were enrolled or districts that were enrolled had the option to enroll teams of leaders, really reflecting that distributed nature of leadership. So when we talk about leaders, we usually are seeing multiple leaders participate in this training. So briefly, I want to summarize some exciting, kind of hot off the presses or not even yet in the presses, findings from the trials that really underscore the importance of understanding what's going on in these team-based implementation efforts and in the Teams Leadership Institute in particular. So preliminary findings from the parent trials found that TLI was significantly associated both with higher provider fidelity compared to the non-TLI conditions, and then also statistically significant improvements in child outcomes in the TLI condition compared to the non-TLI conditions. And then in regards to what is TLI impacting? Preliminary findings also suggest that TLI is associated with the leaders' increased implementation support strategy use. So these are the kind of explicit behaviors that the leaders are engaging in during this implementation process. At least preliminarily, and I say this knowing that there are people on this call that may know more now that we have a full data set, the hypothesized mechanisms, so implementation, leadership, and climate, these were, our data were indicating these were not engaged, indicating a need to understand what's going on in these teams. So what are the optimal structures, what are the dynamics, and understanding those more deeply, and what's going on in that black box. So this brings me to the current project, which aims to identify team inputs associated with implementation outcomes within this trial. So implementation outcomes including those support strategies, and then provider completion of training and fidelity to those models. And then also identifying team processes associated with implementation outcomes. Sorry, I just had my computer freeze for 1 second. Give me 1 second. Sorry for the stopping sharing. Give me 2 seconds. I think I need to close it and reopen it.
I'm also happy to share my screen and advance it if that would be helpful.
Let me just try to reopen it. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. One more try. Okay, it looks like it opened, so at least there's that. Okay, I'm going to reshare. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Sometimes Zoom does that. All right, you can see again?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so just reiterating, our aims were to identify team inputs associated with implementation outcomes, and then also team processes. And similar to what Melina shared, this is old news now, but we also, grounded our study in an adapted model of the center's team effectiveness for implementation. And really what we're proposing is to look at the team inputs that comprise the Team's Leadership Institute, and then also study the team mechanisms that are at play during the implementation strategy. And the project focuses, pulled data from the parent trial to code the TLI process data. So during these intervention, or during the TLI intervention, leaders are coached in these, behaviors that are research-based in regards to their supportive implementation efforts. And there's about biweekly and moving towards monthly meetings with a TLI coach who helps facilitate identification of goals to move forward, and helps to scaffold kind of progress in the room towards implementing these strategies. So the material that we're extracting to code for secondary analyses include the recorded meetings, notes from those calls that were usually done via Zoom. And then we also have leader interviews, semi-structured interviews, where we plan to also look at these team processes through qualitative coding. So the first step in our method is collecting the data that we'll use. And while the sources of the data already exist, it is quite a process in this large trial to make them usable for our study and accessible to an external research team. So at the very moment, I'm very, very grateful to UCSD collaborators who are doing a lot of work to prepare these data. And then we're spending time right now cleaning and restructuring our data sets so that they're ready for our primary analyses. The bulk of this work is using community partnered approach to develop a coding scheme that evaluates these inputs and processes. So like I mentioned, this includes the raw data include workshop and coaching calls, meeting materials that are going to be randomly sampled, and then transcripts of those semi-structured interviews. We have not yet begun the development with our partners in the coding scheme, but are really excited to do that very soon, where we're using that framework and information from the proposal development in regards to what factors we think may be at play, and then refining them through pilot testing and discussion to come to a refined coding scheme. And then the fun part will be, both calculating input variables that are informed by team effectiveness research taxonomies, and then coding those process variables in the various content, including thematic coding of the audio recorded content and the transcripts that come from that. Our analytic plan will be applying regression analyses to assess associations between these team factors that we code, and then implementation outcomes that are measured at 6 months. So I'm just briefly presenting kind of a visual of our measures and constructs. So our inputs, these are really the team characteristics. We'll be deriving from baseline surveys, descriptives of the team's leadership intervention. The team processes are coming from the coding meeting recordings and notes, and then in-depth interviews are conducted at the end of 6 months of training. And then, as I mentioned, our implementation outcomes are provider fidelity and implementation support strategies. Briefly, I know I mentioned that our coding scheme is not developed yet, but in developing this proposal, we hypothesized some of the factors that we thought would be impactful. And just highlighting a couple of these here are things like how frequently the meeting is occurring, how large are these teams, how many leaders are there, what about stability? So a lot of turnover in these community programs. What about who are the leaders engaged? So we're assessing measures of diversity in regards to their status or level of leadership, as well as the variety of expertise in that team. And then the process variables there are a lot of options, and so this will be refined. But what is pictured here are strong candidates. So things like goal specification, coordination, monitoring of progress. These were selected based on discussion with our partners, and then also informed by experience on the trial for what type of processes may be playing a part. And then on the early end right now, in terms of beginning to characterize our sample, but preliminarily, I wanted to share just a little bit about who I'm talking about here. So our sub-sample includes 37 programs comprised of 54 implementation teams. So some of these programs participated in multiple cohorts of training, and so they will each be individually evaluated as a team. There's a surprisingly equal balance, perfect even balance of mental health agencies and school districts. An average of about 2 leaders per team with a range of 1 to 6. And you'll see in this figure on the right that about a quarter of the teams in this subsample had only one leader. So that was an option. This is something that we are developing our plan for. I will say I would like to code these as best we can, because I think there may be some interesting kind of offshoot questions. For example, whether a team or not a team may influence implementation outcomes, but the majority of the sample had about 2 or 3 leaders. Average duration of this intervention was about 6 months, 6 to 7 months. I mentioned the bulk of this is these initial workshops, training leaders in the implementation, leadership, and climate, and how to develop these individualized leadership goals. And then these recurrent coaching calls, which occurred about 8 to 9 times during the duration of the intervention, lasting about 20 minutes. So really excited to keep moving forward. And in summary, for what we've been doing thus far, recruiting and training our team members, compiling and cleaning those data. We are in the midst of working with our team to de-identify data so it can be used, transcribe the audio recordings for qualitative coding, and just beginning to do some initial pilot testing of coding schemes and calculating some of those input variables that need recoding of our variables and calculations. And moving forward, following that pilot testing is we'll be completing our qualitative coding. And of course, the fun part is doing our analyses to look at what we find here. And that's about all I have. So I will wrap up just by thanking the very, very many people who have been involved in the work that preceded this or the work that we are doing now, the participants in the studies, all the partners, and just building this slide of thank yous with all the different acronyms and pictures is a testament to how important this work is and how many people it takes to do this work. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. And thank you for your tolerance of my screen.
Thank you so much, Alia. Again, a really wonderful presentation and really exciting project. Does anybody have any questions for Ali? I will answer that before, because I'm reading Patty, who's one of her partners, gave a question that is on my mind. So I'm just going to answer it. She was suggesting or asking whether we might consider the coach to be a member of the team. I was thinking the same thing. I didn't Thank you, Patty. Loud, but absolutely. So I think that is one way to interpret this, and my numbers are not including the coach. So I do believe that the coach is an integral member of the team, and I wanted to talk to my partners about their thoughts on that. So Patty, I'm curious if you wanted to expand on that anymore, if you had any ideas about the coach being a member of the team.
So I had the advantage of actually being a coach on the project. So I definitely, the district that I coach ended up with attrition having a team of 1. I definitely think that there was interplay between myself in the coaching role and the administrator that remained, and see that as being a really important consideration. Because she was a team of 1. So yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up a point that perhaps the coach has a more integral role depending on how large your team is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you also addressed a question that I was wondering, which was if there were different coaches across the different teams, and might there be between coach differences in some of these, relationships? Yes.
I think that's a great question. And I think we could certainly talk about, there were different coaches. So there was a team of coaches. And I think that would be interesting to look at. I wondered if you had an idea.
I think that's so I completely agree, Patty, with this idea about the coach being part of the team. As far as who the coach is, it wasn't random of how coaches got assigned to teams. We broke it up of who was taking school districts versus community-based agencies. And then there was some regional assignments. So I wish we had more, but I think there was a lot of procedures that might interfere with being able to get more in depth about the role of the coach. However, the transcripts of the calls, including what the coach is saying could be, as a way to just capture coach's input in the process and their role in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I could see coding something just about level of almost like how much time the coach is talking in the meeting versus facilitating and scaffolding it. And Lauren, your idea also made me think about coding, like looking at when it was, like you said, procedurally, sometimes there were barriers, but looking at what the expertise is of the coach and how that may inform the development of goals.
Yes, absolutely.
I was even thinking about the length of coaching calls, the duration, the frequency of coaching calls, that could potentially vary by coach or even by that interplay between coach and leader or leader team. It's I don't know how to disentangle it, but it certainly is interesting and I think potentially impactful.
Yeah, but of course there's major limitations, right? Those weren't randomized, but it's for pilot data, it would be interesting to look at which of those factors seem to play a role.
I love the idea also of retaining the single leader teams as a bit of an exploration of differences between multi-leader teams and single leader teams. I really like that.
Thank you.
Allie, I just want to acknowledge just the descriptive information. A lot went into just accessing that information. And so that in itself is useful to just look at, the number of coaching calls, and how that varied and who was on the team, and then accessing all of those multiple data sources that we didn't really intend to code in the way that you are. Just gathering the data, it's a huge task, and it's already generating information. So
yes.
Good work.
Yes, it's an activity of harnessing data that was used for really training purposes in a exciting way, but it is with the barrier of we didn't intend to use it this way.
Curious about a procedural or logistic question. Maybe it's potentially an ethics question. For example, the coaching call transcripts and analyzing coaching calls when they weren't necessarily recorded with this purpose in mind. Are you having to contact those individuals to consent them to this kind of analysis, or is it sort of exempt because it's going to be completely de-identified?
Yeah, it's there was consent to record and everything, and then it's part of what's taking so long is to completely de-identify the process, and that is not that takes a lot.
Yes,
I feel like I want to very much acknowledge right now in this room Devin and Lizzie, who are doing a lot of work helping with that, and all of Lauren's team. So it's a lot.
Well, are there any additional questions for Allie in this exciting project? Well, thank you again, Allie, for presenting. And just like with Melina, I'm excited to hear what you uncover moving forward. So now we'll pass the baton to Joel for our final presentation for today.
Cool. Thanks, Marissa, and thank you both for those great presentations. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right, is everyone can see that all right? Cool. So thank you again for having me today. My name is Joel Cremay, as Marissa said. I'm a research associate at the Child and Adolescent Services Research Center at UC San Diego. And I'm presenting about our pilot study today called Team Effectiveness Processes in Child Welfare Services, Child and Family Team Meetings, or CFTs. So first, I just want to thank the InStep program for funding this pilot study and note sort of the background of the pilot study. So this pilot was developed in support of the R34 study, applying after-action reviews to child and family team meetings to support improved mental health service linkages within child welfare services, led by Dr. Greg Ahrens, Dr. Daniel Fettis, and Dr. Marissa Sklar are on this call. So this pilot study came out of that, and it was developed collaboratively with San Diego County Child and Family Wellbeing, or the Child Welfare Services. So the study background, the pilot study sort of emerged out of conversations that we were having within the larger R34 project. So right now in the broader R34 project, we're in the first phase where we're interviewing county leadership. We're interviewing partner organizations, running focus groups about CFT meetings, or child and family team meetings. And during the course of these conversations with folks in their data team, their administrators, they mentioned that they had a large amount of post-CFT meeting survey data that they hadn't been able to analyze. And they noted that they felt that this post-CFT survey data held a lot of important information about child and family team meetings, about members of the meetings' experiences in the meetings, and really expressed the desire to have the data analyzed. And we were sitting in the meeting and we thought, well, this is a really great opportunity, and we could create a pilot study that really aligns with both the intentions of the RFA for InStep to support community engaged partnerships driven by the needs of partners. And it really represented a unique opportunity to work with data that was collected by a partner organization and support their goals to better understand child and family team meetings. So it's really the goal of this, and how this pilot study came about, was to support San Diego County Child and Family Wellbeing with real meaningful information that helps them inform their evidence-based practice of child and family team meetings. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of backdrop in child welfare, and why child and family team meetings are so important. And I'll talk about the actual evidence-based practice of CFT meetings in a second. But just broadly speaking, there's a high prevalence of mental and behavioral health needs among children and youth involved in the child welfare system. So involvement in the child welfare system broadly is associated with experiences of maltreatment and familial and community instabilities that really intersect with social marginalities that have exposed children, youth, their families to really high levels of trauma and instability. And so because of that, approximately 3/4 of the children and youth that are entering child welfare services involvement exhibit mental and behavioral health challenges that really warrant specialized care. And that's significantly higher than their community peers. So in fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics has identified mental and behavioral health as one of the greatest unmet needs for children, youth, and foster care. And there's strong evidence to suggest that many children and youth currently involved in child welfare services aren't actually receiving appropriate mental and behavioral health services while in care. And CFT meetings are one of the evidence-based interventions that have been used by county child welfare agencies in California and across the country and currently used in San Diego to really help coordinate that service delivery, among other things like ensuring safety and permanence for youth involved in the system. So team decision-making processes that are embedded in the child and family team meetings have been shown to really support the connection of children and families to mental and behavioral health treatments and to increase timely family reunification. So, you know, I worked as a public child welfare social worker before, and I've seen it myself. And then the evidence also supports that these CFT meetings are oftentimes the first opportunity for families, social workers, all the service providers to really get together in one space to meet and discuss case plan objectives and treatment needs for the children and families when they become involved in the child welfare system. So this really positions CFT meetings as this like crucial opportunity to establish those mechanisms of team effectiveness, such as goal specification, strategy formation, communication, trust building, that establish strong relationships and help support collaborative decision-making for youth and family well-being. So I'm going to go through into what is an actual child and family team meeting. So CFT meetings are evidence-based interventions. They bring together youth, parents, guardians, social workers, relatives, non-extended related family members, behavioral health providers, and other supports that are identified by youth and their families, termed natural supports oftentimes, in this collaborative meeting to create an action plan and address child service requirements and needs. So what the goal of the CFT meeting is to end with an action plan that addresses the child and the family's needs. And CFT meetings are led by a facilitator. In this case, facilitation is carried out in San Diego County by a partner agency called Fred Finch, and they run the facilitation for San Diego County's child and family team meetings in most cases. There are some cases where CFT meetings are currently held in-house with San Diego County Child and Family Wellbeing. So each youth comes into the child welfare system in San Diego, is required to have a CFT meeting within 60 days of entering services to identify areas of behavioral, emotional, or social needs and complete the initial child and family well-being action plan. So CFTs draw on the child and the family's strengths, or they're intended to draw on the family's and child's strengths, their experiences and knowledge. They're intended to be strength-based group decision processes. And literature suggests the use of collaborative team decision-making supports the promotion of active engagement and development of trust among the families, the youth, the social workers, and the service providers. So the CFT meetings are really designed for these joint decision makings. The CFT meetings are this vital process for connecting families to the support and resources, but oftentimes there are challenges within the meetings because folks come into with different types of goals and orientations towards the agenda items on the action plan. So this study really provides an opportunity to contribute to the field of dissemination and implementation research to examine how child and family team meetings are understood by the family members and the community providers and the social workers. The study is guided, as all these pilot studies are, by the conceptual model of team effectiveness for EBP implementation, which positions this research to contribute to understanding how team process mechanisms build shared understandings and promote the realization of really key child welfare service aims. So when we look at the evidence-based practice, we have child and family team meetings. Team inputs are CFT meeting member roles, team mechanisms, and then team outcomes. And I'll go through that, how we've modeled that out in the next few slides, because the data that we received in this study wasn't created by us. We were given this data at secondary, and they created the items. So the pilot study aims to conduct this multi-methods analysis of this secondary data that was developed and collected by San Diego County Child and Family Wellbeing. On the quantitative side of things, we want to evaluate how CFT members' views of team mechanisms are associated with how they understand the CFT meeting's ability to connect youth and families to appropriate mental health and behavioral health services, and then whether or not CFT members viewed the meetings as creating action plans that represent the youth and family needs in an authentic way. And then qualitatively, we have quite a few short answer responses that were collected to the questions, what went well in the CFT meetings, and then how could the CFT meetings be improved? And so we're going to explore the responses to these open-ended survey items and look at what people said about them based upon their different roles in the meetings. So going back to the study data, initially, when we started having these discussions with Child and Family Wellbeing, we had discussed, and they had discussed, having pre-pandemic and post-pandemic data that could be analyzed. And this was really exciting because from an analytic perspective, because the pre-pandemic CFT meetings were all held in person. And after the meeting, all the members of the CFT meeting were provided a paper anonymous survey to fill out voluntarily. And then we were told that the results from those paper surveys were put into an electronic database by Child and Family Wellbeing. And so we would have that pre-pandemic data. And then we'd also get the post-pandemic data, or during the COVID-19 pandemic, when CFT meetings were switched to virtually and conducted via Zoom. And at that time, the post-CFT survey was then delivered with an anonymous survey link online to everyone who joined the meeting, and folks could fill it out that way. Unfortunately, we were only able to receive the post-pandemic survey. So all of the data that we actually received from Child and Family Wellbeing represents electronic surveys. So we had initially come into this with an aim to look at how the platform impacted folks, participant and members of the CFT meetings, thoughts about team effectiveness, whether or not in-person or Zoom changed that. But since we weren't able to do that, we're looking specifically at the roles of members rather than the platform. So we're using data from 2020 to 2023. San Diego County Child and Family Wellbeing conducts roughly 120 CFT meetings each fiscal quarter. So everyone who went to a CFT during this time was provided an anonymous survey link. The post-CFT survey participation was totally optional, and just it didn't ask any demographic questions. So folks were able to answer as honestly as possible, because many folks who are involved, particularly parents, youth, caregivers, have some fear about reporting negative things while involved, particularly in the early stages of a child welfare services case plan, because they feel reticent to share, thinking their responses might reflect poorly on their case. So the sample that we received was 1,408 surveys that were anonymously collected. It all post-pandemic, and participation ranged from different member roles. The question of member roles was the only demographic data that was provided in the survey. And so that is how we're looking at different groups with this survey data. One of the questions to develop member roles was, what is your relationship to the child or youth in the CFT meeting? 131 individuals clicked the box other, but didn't provide any additional information. Some folks clicked other and provided additional information. They were moved into the category that reflected what they wrote. But we ended up with providers, child and family well-being personnel, which includes social workers, their supervisors, resource families that includes caregivers, adoptive families, foster families, relatives or natural supports. And natural supports are like coaches, teachers, neighbors, folks that the family or child has identified as their support system, biological family members, and then legal support and attorneys. We only had 6 youth fill out the surveys and 4 facilitators. We know that both youth and facilitators are integral members of these teams, but we assume that in the analysis stage of this study, we won't be using the youth facilitators or other categories for analytic purposes. So the quantitative data outcomes that we're interested in are were behavioral health needs addressed in the CFT meeting? And then did the action plan represent youth and family needs? So these questions were all asked to CFT meeting members on a Likert scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. And those are the 2 outcomes that we're going to be examining with this secondary data. The team mechanisms, and we received this data and we're still in a process of mapping the survey items that we have onto the team effectiveness constructs that we would like to measure. And so this is still a work in process, but the team mechanisms or team meeting processes, looking at 7 items that hang together fairly well, maybe too well as to be redundant, but there are questions like, I understood what the CFT meeting was for before the meeting started. The team was able to create and follow group agreements. We spent enough time on each topic, and I was able to give my opinion. So those are the team meeting processes we're looking at. And then we wanted to look at emergent states. So we had 3 items that sort of map onto this concept of emergent states. The cultural factors were respected and included during the discussion. My opinions helped make the decisions in the meeting. And I felt my concerns and voice were heard during this meeting. And then on top of the quantitative data, we had multiple qualitative data. So the first, we had 1,182 short answer responses to the question, what went well during the meeting? Some examples of the responses we got were, everyone had the opportunity to speak and share, or everyone was respectful and had time to speak. The facilitator did a great job keeping things flowing and explain during the meeting. And then we had 747 short answer responses to the question, what would make the CFT meeting better? Some examples are more information prior to the meeting regarding what the meeting was about and the agenda. So with this qualitative data, we plan to analyze it using deductive coding with team effectiveness constructs, and then also inductive open coding to examine how we can use this data to better inform and provide feedback to child and family well-being about what CFT members are telling us about CFTs and how they can be improved. So the next steps for this study are the analysis plan. We're going to be doing the analysis of the quantitative and qualitative data. That will be conducted over the next few months. We're also looking at still getting additional data from child and family well-being. We've had multiple discussions with them about potentially getting more of the pre-data or being able to locate that pre-pandemic data, which would really open up our analytic plan to some of our initial goals, looking at pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. Right now, we're just looking at the post-pandemic, but it would be wonderful. And we've had some conversations about that data maybe becoming available or being found. And then the qualitative data analysis will also be conducted. And at the end, we hope to provide deliverables to child and family well-being in early 2024 that can really help both inform the larger R34 that we're working on in phase 1 and phase 2, and provide deliverables to the county to help inform CFT meeting evidence-based practice intervention. So we've talked about creating deliverables for the county, a summary report for county leadership, making different fact sheets to different audiences. So for parents and youth, families, for practitioners, for different supports, community service providers about CFT meetings that pulls in the information that we learned from this study and gives some instructions and helpful feedback to help support them and inform them about the CFT meeting goals, that parents and youth know that they can call a CFT meeting and bring the team together to talk about goal specification and strategies. And then community presentations. We're going to present our findings of this study to the child welfare leadership and staff and the facilitating agency to share back what we've learned with all of them as they work to improve this evidence-based practice. And then finally, we plan to present our findings at conferences, hopefully in the next year. So those are targeted deliverables and the next steps. And appreciate any questions and feedback.
Thank you, Joel. I'm biased, but I think this is a really exciting project, really important work that is being done, and a really lovely example of the relationship between, researcher and community partner to do some work that is potentially really impactful. And as Patty mentioned, really lovely that the dissemination plan involves sharing findings again with the partners. So I'll open the door for any questions or feedback from any individuals here.
So thank you, Joel. And I guess I'm biased as well, but I'm just, as you were talking, it's fairly unique for researchers to partner like with a service system and then use this type of service system data that was developed and collected by them. And I think, I come in with a bias, of having like strong psychometric measures developed by researchers, et cetera. But this is kind of a cool opportunity to bring in data that's conceptualized by our partners. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing in those data and your thoughts about the types of questions that were asked and how it sort of fits with this project and with a research perspective in general?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point about the difference in data quality from what we might anticipate or expect coming from data developed by an academic research team, and then the data that is developed by our community partners. And it's a great opportunity to sort of contrast that, and we're seeing that with the data as it's coming in, and how the survey items were created. And I think that it gives a really clear and interesting picture of what's actually been being conducted on the ground and being used by community organizations that are sort of outside the academic bubble. But it does make it more difficult to do really robust analysis when the psychometric properties of the survey that we haven't been established. And so I think that is a balancing act with collaborating with community partners on this. When we look at the initial data, I think that there really are some strengths to it, and it does map on well to varying degrees with the team effectiveness constructs. And in our initial analyses, so I looked at both the outcomes individually, and I looked at the different items individually and different scales that we've created so far initially, and I compared them by groups. And across the board, parents, natural supports, and relatives had lower mean scores than did social workers, service providers, and legal supports. And they were significantly different for the most part on every single one of the measures, with parents rating the effectiveness of these meetings more poorly than the professionals. And so I think that really reflects the data in the research base that we have coming into this, that parents go into these meetings feeling disempowered, feeling like they haven't had enough ability to contribute meaningfully in the child welfare process, both in the court proceedings and then throughout the case plan development. And this really offers an opportunity for us as academic researchers to partner with the agency and say, look, this is actually happening here in San Diego County. We need to do a better job, and help the agency needs to do a better job of supporting parents and giving them these opportunities to meaningfully collaborate and create these teams that trust one another and can really create effective service plans for kids and youth. So I think it's an exciting opportunity, but I also acknowledge that there are a lot of methodological challenges using this type of data.
Fantastic. Brilliant question, Greg. Lovely answer, Joel. I see we're at the end of our webinar time. It's 3:30. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. Again, I'm so excited to hear from each of our pilot project presenters. Such fantastic work that you all are doing, and thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, everyone.